Welcome to the CalTAP Veteran Cultural Competency for Non-Clinical Faculty and Staff. If you have not watched the General Veteran Cultural Competency, you are strongly encouraged to do so, as it provides important foundational information for this training. Why is this presentation important? Higher education serves as a mean for economic mobility. It allows you to improve your quality of life, it allows you to improve yourself as an individual, and it gives an opportunity to advance. When we think about the history of veterans, that's always been an important facet. When we think about the original GI Bill and its formation, the thing is that student veterans, even though they have these financial support networks, are also non-traditional students, and they have unique life experiences that can impact their ability to thrive on campus. And as a society, we have all made an investment in veterans education through the GI Bill. And it would behoove us to ensure that we can understand the needs of student veterans and make the most of their educational opportunities. Before proceeding, if you haven't gone through our General Veteran Cultural Competency module yet, I would highly recommend that you would go through that before starting this. Here's a roadmap of what we're going to be going over in this presentation. We're going to be talking about the GI Bill basics. We're going to talk about veterans as non-traditional students. We're going to go through some barriers to success for our student veterans, and we're going to talk about effective campus services and supports that we've seen being able to help create a situation for veterans to thrive in. As I mentioned earlier, universities are an important way for anybody within society and to be able to advance their quality of life, to advance their general position in life. And that's no different when it comes to veterans. What's unique when we talk about veterans is that there are a lot of specific circumstances revolving around veteran status, around the veteran experience, and what that means with them becoming a student, potentially at your school. They need more than educational benefits in order to ensure academic success. And the majority of veteran challenges aren't directly caused by their schools. It's caused by outside circumstances. It's about outside cultural circumstances, things where it might be a part of the transitioning process for them, but feeling a degree of alienation by being a veteran on campus. So despite that the issues themselves might not be specifically the fault or the onus on colleges and universities are also the ones uniquely positioned to intervene and respond because that is their backyard. They are in the best position to take care of their students. Most oftentimes when we think about student veterans in higher education, the GI Bill almost immediately comes to mind. Now, it's important to note that not all student veterans have the GI Bill, and the GI Bill itself isn't necessarily a catch-all. We're going to go more specific into the benefits about the GI Bill, but let's go over a small overview. The GI Bill traces its origins to the Service Members Readjustment Act of 1944. Since then, it's undergone a lot of changes and a lot of drastic improvements. The most commonly used versions that we think of when we talk about it tends to be the post-9/11 GI Bill, which also includes important provisions for private institutions such as the Yellow Ribbon Program. The Forever GI Bill is even more recent. We're talking about 2017, which helps remove certain time stipulations that we now understand for certain degrees is unreasonable. The 4-year degree is becoming less and less of an average length of time for a degree, as we've been seeing. And the initial incarnation that we've seen for a lot of older veterans and veterans of early Gulf War tends to be the Montgomery GI Bill of 1984. In dissecting the GI Bill, the first part that's the most obvious to talk about is GI Bill eligibility. And this is where things are not clearly understood by the civilian population and not necessarily understood by educators or faculty either. And determining the eligibility is the first steps that veterans take to receive their benefits. They have to actively apply for their benefits. And each version of the GI Bill has different criteria. One of the common similarities is that they must have an honorable discharge from recent enlistment. This is to say that maybe if they have a general discharge or an other than honorable discharge, they might not have the GI Bill as a benefit. So they can come with all the complications and struggles of being a veteran, but they don't have the financial aid that comes with veteran status. Time and service requirements is also a very important part of the GI Bill. Most people assume that by default, serving in the military, you get the GI Bill, you get the full range of benefits. That's not true. It depends on your time in service, and more specifically, it's a rating of you spend a certain amount of years doing this amount of years equals to a 70% rating or 80% rating on up. So it's also important when we think about, hey, here's a veteran that does have the GI Bill. They might only be having 70% of that total benefit. The Veterans Benefits Administration has established periods of time for each type of educational benefit. For example, the post 9/11 GI Bill, the service must begin on or after September 11, 2001. When we talk about GI Bill funding, what does the post 9/11 GI Bill or all the other GI Bills, what do they really cover? They typically provide 36 months of education benefits. This has recently had some policy changes that we've seen in the Forever GI Bill, where for certain things such as STEM degrees, they may add a few additional months, realizing it could potentially take about 5 years in order to accomplish the degree. Veterans may receive up to 48 months of benefits if they qualify for another education benefit, for example, transfer from the Montgomery GI Bill to the post 9/11 GI Bill. Members who served in the reserves after active duty can extend benefits by applying for the Montgomery GI Bill selective reserve option. Both Montgomery GI Bill and the post 9/11 GI Bill had expiration dates to use the GI Bill funds, known as the use it or lose it dates. These were typically 10 to 15 years since you have exited the military, which can be a huge problem for older generations. Maybe they didn't know how to use the GI Bill. Maybe they were going through a particularly rough stint post-military. Maybe they just lost track of time, but this does happen where they have lost this benefit. The Forever GI Bill now removes this. GI Bill also covers a substantial education cost, but it doesn't represent actual dollar amount. Housing, tuition, fees, and books are included in the overall benefits provided. Yellow Ribbon is a provision of the post 9/11 GI Bill, which private schools may adopt to increase tuition assistance within a cap total. Public schools do not have a cap. Online schools' tuition caps are based on the national average tuition. Here's kind of an idea of a basic allowance for housing breakdown, or a BAH. It's great because it allows you to pursue school full-time while you're at school. So let's say you're a single veteran, you're going into college, you're set out on completing it within about that 4-year marker. This is a great time for, if you're maximizing using that every single semester or every single quarter, you could do things like internships because you don't have to worry about having a job outside of it. That might not necessarily be the case if you're living in a more expensive area, or if you have a family, or a whole host of other issues of which, hey, this might be a nice allowance for while I'm in school, but I still need to save money, or I still need additional money in order to make ends meet. Or, and this is where it becomes a bit difficult, is BAH does not exist during your vacation time period. So let's say you have winter break or summer break. Those are a few months out of the year that you're not getting paid anything. So unless you have money saved over in order to weather those time periods, or you have another plan set up, that can be really difficult because you might just need to get seasonal employment for those few months, and that's not necessarily a popular form of employment or something that's easy to get. Or even if you do get it, that might not cover the cost of your living situation for that period of time. That basic allowance for housing isn't necessarily enough, is specifically when we talk about places like the Bay Area. In a lot of places within the United States, it can be great. It can be fantastic. Living in a rural area or a smaller, more affordable city, BAH can really, really work. When we're focusing on California, and we look at places like the Bay Area, BAH still may not necessarily be enough. Unfortunately, due to the cost of living out here, even if we think about the higher tier of what you might be able to get for your basic allowance for housing here, we do see homeless veterans, homeless student veterans, where they aren't making enough to be able to cover the basic cost of living. Or they might not be able to afford the in-betweens because they can't afford those gaps in school that may prevent them from a housing situation, or it might increase the challenges that they're having in college by having to actively work for it, or taking one of the alternative options and commuting. But that's commuting as a full-time student an hour to 2 hours outside from the Bay, or even farther than that. And it really depends where in California. That's just something to keep in mind. Going into the Yellow Ribbon program, this is a bit more important for when we talk about private universities. When it comes to public universities, the VA pays the total. They pay the maximum for in-state tuition. Private universities, since they could be a bit more pricey and a bit more expensive, can compensate using the Yellow Ribbon program, but it is a program that the private university has to opt into. Both the private college and the VA make matching contribution beyond public school tuition caps. Here we have an example where Yellow Ribbon College pays $10K into the program. The VA pays an additional $10K into the program. So that's an additional $20K per year on top of whatever the GI Bill was initially covering. Because when the GI Bill is applied to public university, it only goes to the total public cap for paying to that private university. To get more information on education benefits, or a better outline, especially for student veterans, the Veterans Benefit Administration is the best place to go to, the VBA. We have their phone number posted up here. They are the one that specifically handles education benefits within the VA. That's completely under their purview, and they're able to help out when it comes to eligibility, information, and being able to go more in depth. Unfortunately, VA certifying officials may or may not have that information, but that's not considered to be a part of their professional expertise or necessarily under their blanket. That's not under the purview of their job. It's better that if you want more information, the VBA is one of the better resources to go to, or hopefully there might be a veteran resource center on campus that does have this kind of institutional knowledge. Yet, again, VBA is the best one to go to. Talking about outreach methods and support, it is important to note that veterans are definitely a difficult community to conduct any degree of outreach to. Speaking as a veteran who does have to engage in outreach to other veterans, there's a variety of ways to go about that, and universities and colleges are in a unique situation where they're something that typically veterans are going to be seeking after, even if they don't self-identify. If veterans do self-identify, there can be a variety of ways to approach that. We've seen some schools have other student veterans call up veterans that have applied to the school, talking about being able to get them in, reviewing over their application, seeing what they can do to strengthen that. And by association, that's serving as a way to support veterans. That's almost kind of giving an idea to veterans of, hey, if you're coming into the school, you're already being supported because we're taking care of you in the recruitment process. We've seen some schools do that in really unique ways, and we've seen that bolster recruitment of veterans. Because, again, this is a unique situation where veterans are actively looking to get a degree. They're looking to go to school. They're looking to improve their quality of life. And it's a unique position of outreach to be able to find creative ways to reach out to those veterans, finding ways to pull them in and making them feel at home before they even get to the university or college. Retention and ways to ensure retention. Broad overview of threats to retention. Not enough GI Bill money. Let's say they're only getting a 70% rating when it comes to getting GI Bill benefits. That might cover some of the tuition. It might not be enough to make ends meet on a month-to-month. It might make them consider if they don't get enough financial aid outside of the GI Bill. the difficulty of navigating resources. It can be incredibly frustrating as being a veteran, and especially if you're using veteran-specific benefits, to try and use those benefits and not have anybody have any real answers for what you need. I've gone through so many support services and at a few different colleges where I would try and actively find out benefits, what would go on. Some colleges were fantastic. I was able to have a one-stop shop in order to being able to address those issues and finding different things out. Other ones, I could not really find out about the status of my own benefits from the school, and I wasn't really given an alternative resource to try and find those benefits. And I felt like I was really out of the air and kind of having difficulty trying to get something that I knew I had. Isolation is another big one. When you're a veteran on campus, it's one thing to be at a 4-year institution as a freshman or junior. Let's say you transferred over into community college, and here you are about 25 years old, having this breath of life experience under you, but you're sharing classrooms with 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds. It can be incredibly isolating at times, especially when you're engaged in class and you're trying to share your life experience, or you're trying to really be a part of that conversation. There's times where you can feel really alienated. Mental health is another one. We've seen a lot of schools recently provide some degree of mental health counseling or support on campus, but situations that veterans have gone through are unique, and there's oftentimes a lot of therapists on campus who aren't necessarily as well equipped to deal with that. And competing priorities. When we think about veterans that are starting school later into adult life, they're definitely fitting the role of non-traditional student. There's a lot of cases of a veteran going to a 4-year institution, and they're like, yeah, it's great. I could totally go into a dorm room, except that I'm typically 3 years older than everybody else that's going to live there, maybe 4, 5, 6 years older than everybody else who's going to live there. I've got a family that I need to take care of. Where are they going to live? Some places have accommodating with family dorm rooms, but again, those places can be really, really, really small, and a veteran doesn't necessarily want to put their family for that. So when we think about retention, not enough GI Bill money, potentially afraid of tuition costs or being able to make ends meet month to month, we can look at veteran-specific scholarships, veteran-specific housing. When we think about the difficulty of navigating resources, veteran resource centers are one of the best places to go to. Most colleges and universities that I've seen that have had a thriving veteran resource center, you can see the veteran community glow around it. It becomes a one-stop shop. They don't need to rely on a lot of other support services that's located at their school, because their VRC manages to serve the role of all of those different jobs while being one place for veterans to go to that has an understanding of veterans and their uniqueness compared to the rest of the school's culture. When we talk about isolation, getting people into extracurricular activities can help. Peer mentoring programs can also be really fantastic. Having somebody that's a go-to. In our military life, we're used to having people of, hey, I have a question. I know to ask this question. I know a person to go to ask this question. And if that person doesn't know how to answer my question, they know where to find answers for my question. You don't get that in the civilian world. When you have developed peer mentoring programs, that is your civilian equivalent. And those have shown to work out really well for veterans. When we talk about mental health and potentially you don't have the appropriate support on campus, there are VA psychologists who are more than happy to have office hours on a campus and doing outreach once a week, every other week, coming out there and sitting on with it. We have seen school staff members also take up kind of the mantle of specializing in veterans issues and building a reputation within their own specific veteran communities. And for those people who step up, they're also an incredibly great resource. And if they're on your campus, seek them out. And when we talk about, again, competing priorities and we think about families, family programs, childcare, scholarships for families, work studies, these are all things that can help with the stress of being a non-traditional student and trying to cope with family life while at the same time trying to earn a degree in higher education. These are things that you want to reflect when it comes to your university or college. You want to ask yourself, what system is in place to research policies related to student veterans in order to inform best practices and improve supports? What do you know about veterans, and how can you use this knowledge to inform our campus community? And what does your research tell you about this population? This infographic was produced by us at Swords to Plowshares as a part of our study, The Path Forward: What Universities Need to Know to Help Student Veterans Succeed. If you look at the areas of need, all of these are things that can be tackled at the college level. The need for improved career counseling and job placement. When we talk about housing placement and case management, student housing, supportive services to retain students experiencing difficulty graduating, outside resources for VA-related claims, and support for working households with children. In ways that you can better help a non-traditional student is also in better ways that you can help a student veteran. I keep mentioning non-traditional students. Why are veterans considered non-traditional students? And I've mentioned a little bit earlier, but to go into specific, most veterans are older than their peers and would be considered non-traditional students for several reasons. We're talking about age, we're talking about employment, we're talking about family and obligations outside of school. Nearly 29% of veterans ages 25 to 29, with veterans aged 30 to 34 representing almost 22% of the student veteran population. 45% were married and 46% had children, and 33% were employed while completing their degree. Transition is a constant area of concern and discussion. College is often one of the first big life changes that student veterans make post-military. What can we do in order to make this process easier? What are the common challenges that student veterans face? You can see that we're highlighting here 3 areas of difficulty. Challenges with transition to school can be worsened by inaccessible resources and inadequate information. If you're going into your first year of school, you're going into your first semester or your first quarter, and you don't know who to go to, you don't know who to necessarily talk to, maybe you're the first generation in your family to actually go to school, having inadequate information on top of inaccessible resources can make it incredibly intimidating and incredibly difficult to even think about participating in school. Then we follow up with the difficulty of connecting to non-veterans. We understand veterans as a culture group, and we try and think about that place in a non-veteran population. There's a lot of difficulties, and it's not necessarily in the ways you might think. There's a bunch of different cultural elements, some subtle, some not. One of the things I personally found outside of research, but definitely anecdotal and worth noting, is there was quite a few student veterans who got in trouble in class for either putting curse words in their PowerPoint slide or as a part of doing public speaking in their classroom. Maybe they're doing a presentation and they drop the F-bomb partway through, and that knocks them down a letter grade. The thing is, it's not like they're doing intentionally. They're not trying to be edgy. They're not trying to be cool in this kind of situation. It's cursing is a very normative part of the military to such a way that it can be really detrimental when we connect it into the civilian world. And I've definitely dealt with enough student veterans to see that, and from my own experiences can also see that. And that's a little thing. That's a tiny thing, but that's one of the many things that we see together that might not seem as significant, might not necessarily betray that the person is a student veteran. Like, they're not necessarily self-identifying, but there's all these different personality things, how we communicate, how we interact. In veteran culture, we interact in a way that we would think is assertive. Other people might think that we're too forward. They might think that we're too aggressive or that we're loud. And for us, we don't hear that. We don't necessarily see that. And we have that disconnect. And then that can be off-putting with people. And then especially if we see how civilians are, and maybe that's something that we don't necessarily like about civilian culture, we might not necessarily conceptualize it as that, but it increases the alienation and it increases the difficulty of connecting with non-veterans. This is worsened when we see that a school may not have a solid community of veterans for these students to belong to. Now, what does that mean? Is if there's a school and there's not a student veteran organization on campus or a student veteran club, or maybe there's not an area to congregate like a vet resource center where a bunch of student veterans can get together and do a bunch of work, we're seeing even furthering of isolation. We're seeing a furthering of disconnectedness. Having other student veterans that are going through a shared common experience of, hey, we're all going through school this first time, we all have this commonality of experiences, can definitely help when we talk about that difficulty to transition. But not having that community of veterans to connect to enhances that difficulty. So how can campuses help? Campuses can improve the transition to college by providing ongoing and regular cultural competency training for campus staff and faculty to ensure they are culturally informed of veteran experiences, potential issues resulting from military services, and approaches to care. We can also talk about providing a veteran-specific orientation for incoming students, which we've seen some schools do with great success. It's also about partnering with local VA and vet centers to provide on-campus mental health and counseling services. We've seen that manifest in being able to bring in VA professionals or professionals who focus on different areas of veteran concern, come and provide themselves as an opportunity and as a resource to veterans who are on campus to cover whatever need that they might necessarily have. What do student veterans say about this? When we talk about the transition to college from the military, we have one CCSF student comparing it to reintegrating as being like getting out of prison, and how people view you and how they treat you and how they treat that environment. And no matter what your actual experience in the military was, no matter what you did in the military, your environment is shaped by the perceptions of other people and how they choose to interact with you. And you feel alienated as a result of that, especially when you're trying to reintegrate.
Throughout high school, I quit everything that was hard. And at that, I sat there and I can remember the point. I was out late at night and was out in the field with a drill sergeant pulling me aside saying, you don't have to do this anymore, because he could see my foot was swollen like a cantaloupe. I was in a lot of pain, and I decided that night that I was not going to quit anymore. I was finished quitting. And I begged for another chance. The first sergeant stood up for me and said, give him one more chance, and if he fails it, he goes home. So that was 2 days after I ran that first PT test on a nasty foot in a lot of pain, and I ran it again and I passed it by 12 seconds. It was really a nice confirmation that not quitting is the right decision. But that was really tested the most probably while I was here. I kind of felt like I didn't want to float. I didn't want to just be a leaf in a river, just floating along wherever life took me. I wanted something, and I think the military for me provided that. I wasn't one that joined because I wanted to see the world. I wasn't one that joined because I wanted the benefits of it. I joined because I think I was hoping to find out who I was and to mold that into something that I respected. While I was here, I was in my 30s, while everybody else was more than a decade my junior, so there really wasn't any friend making up here. Mentally, I had a lot going on that I had issues for lack of better words. Countless times, I can't even tell you how many times, not feeling, being down about myself, beating myself up. Student Veteran Center for me really gave me the motivation, the reason to keep pushing forward. Gave me the idea to take it a day at a time. I have never walked out without feeling great. I can't say enough how everybody in the Student Veteran Center is amazing, and they're a phenomenal resource, and they want to help. I really enjoyed the other student veterans that I've met. I've really enjoyed the experiences that I've gotten. I still look back and I owe my graduation to the Student Veterans Center.
When we talk to student veterans about Veteran Resource Center, this quote was very representative about how a lot of student veterans felt about a thriving Veteran Resource Center. This one in particular was from University of California, Berkeley student veteran. When you come here, it makes you feel like you have a home. You have a home base and a touchstone, and that means everything to me. So what can campuses do? One of the things that they can do is many campuses have some type of Veteran Resource Center. Sometimes it could just be a small little office where it's one person running the show and being able to provide information. Other times it's a lot more of an elaborate space. It's a community space. And in those spaces, we particularly see student veterans thrive. So providing a physical space for a Veteran Resource Center, a genuine dedicated space, not necessarily just an office, but it'd be better to step it up and have it as more of a welcoming community space. Providing training and support to the veteran resource staff to ensure services to veterans are consistent and develop programming with students and staff input. The problem that we often see is that a veteran resource center might exist, but the staff themselves might not be dedicated full-time staff to that VRC. They could have a job that is primarily another job. And unfortunately, that means that they're juggling multiple hats in order to accomplish it. We have seen a lot of fantastic and really, really great VRC staff who that's not their primary job, but they are going out of their way to take care of that community and put in all the work that they can in order to make sure that student veterans are thriving. That's great, but it is also really, really hard on the staff members, and they tend to be struggling through quite a bit. Not necessarily saying that they're struggling in being able to provide services. They can be doing fantastic stuff, but they themselves as individuals are being overextended, and they need commitment from their institutions to help them to be able to provide that. And these people oftentimes have a lot of on-hand experience that can help better shape what the campus as a whole is doing for student veterans. They can also partner with outside organizations who can directly address the needs of student veterans or eliminate gaps in services. We know sometimes maybe the Career Counseling Center or the Job Center on campus might not be the most adequate place for a veteran. It could work well maybe for more traditional students, but maybe not necessarily as much for student veterans. There are organizations that are outside of a campus that do specialize in that, and would be more than happy to volunteer their time in order to be able to help with student veterans. Another part is to survey student veterans on campus who don't access veteran-specific resources and find out why they don't. Either attend meetings or use their Veteran Resource Center or use existing support services. Now, this can vary, and that can be a bit more of a challenging approach because, again, it's hard to outreach to student veterans and be able to adequately provide for that. But if you are able to find out and kind of get into the nitty-gritty, you can better develop a way that can make it more attractive or more of an improvement for those student veterans. When we talk about on-campus veteran-specific mental health care, we can see that within California, it's already been done. Not for all colleges, but we have seen it done within the San Francisco area. We've seen the San Francisco VA Medical Center, Fort Miley, has partnered with 6 schools at present and is rolling out programs at San Francisco State and University of San Francisco to be able to provide on-site mental health care. The thing with implementation needs is that MOUs between colleges take time, effort, and a strategy that can be tailored to individual colleges. It needs campus leadership to buy in, and there needs to be a private, accessible, physical space. Coordination with existing campus mental health staff can also work out fantastically for a bunch of different reasons. Benefits we're seeing is accessibility for students, early intervention for stress, depression, and suicide prevention. We're also talking about access to counselors that are familiar with military trauma and resources, increased support, and decreased caseloads for mental health campus care providers. Veterans are also more likely to talk about mental health challenges with their peers. We want colleges and universities to be able to provide dedicated, adequate support for VRC staff. If your school doesn't have a VRC, advocate for it with your student veterans. We've seen quite a few schools in recent years not have a VRC, and the student veterans worked in tandem with faculty in order to get those brought onto campus. Make sure all relevant resources can be accessed through VRCs, and then co-locate veteran-specific mental health services with the VRC.
I needed something to go do every day. I needed some sort of structure like what I had when I was in the Marine Corps.
When I started school, I didn't really have any idea of what I wanted to do. I just knew I had to do something now that I was out of the military. And GI Bill was fantastic because it got me in school.
You could say I went immediately from combat to classroom because it was weeks before I got out, and then maybe several months, and I was in the classroom physically with college students who maybe just graduated high school. It was very interesting.
You know, I'm almost 30, so the majority of them are getting out of high school, or even if they're not getting out of high school, they're pretty early 20s. And so their views on life are completely different.
I took it very seriously because my last job was being in combat. So I took that same intensity into the classroom with me and put it towards the books and studying and what have you. And the guy sitting next to me was obviously not as serious or focused.
You have people that don't seem to, they take for granted the things that you know, like no longer take for granted, i.e. being, subordinate to your professor, being on time, doing things, just for the sake of getting them done. And I think the hardest thing with transitioning is that you want to be a civilian, you want to have the freedom, but then you also want to have that underlying structure.
Unfortunately, I couldn't focus on school, so I was not paying attention to my grades. I stopped caring about my grades. I stopped caring to go to school. And at that point, I realized, I was like, wait, my goals are not going to be able to be achieved. I need to go see somebody because there's something I'm not paying attention to.
I ran into another guy who was about the same age, and we just kind of looked at each other, and I was like, Army, Marine? He's like, I was in the Marines. And we were instantly good friends. And so I kind of started building that support network up. We were leaving class one day, and he was like, hey dude, by the way, you should probably check out student services for their, like they have counseling. Like I go to it from time to time.
The most important thing it did was bring us together as a group of like-minded people. It didn't matter, Army, Air Force, Marines. But the fact that we were military, we were a little bit older, we were feeling our way through the educational system, and with that came the help emotionally, with guidance for careers, and there were other things.
So I eventually sought help through my school because I thought there was more issues than just me transitioning.
So I started with counseling on campus, and that helped for a little bit. And then it was just, I realized that I needed to go to the VA.
So when you go down there, when you go down to the VA and you talk about whatever's bothering you, you're one of 30,000 vets down there that are having the same issues. There's no better place to get help for a veteran than a place that is employed by veterans, run by veterans, and is designed to work around veterans.
It makes it much easier to be able to talk to people about what I was and not just come up to them and be like, oh, I was in the military, kind of reformulating your identity again, which has definitely helped through therapy. So the interpersonal relationships have definitely strengthened.
This generation of soldiers has so many empathetic people around that there's no reason to fall through the cracks. It's detrimental to yourself keeping it inside. Anything you're having trouble with, whether it be getting a student loan or whether it be PTSD. there's no difference. You need to just say it. You need to ask somebody for help.
Well, now I'm a student, and people say, what are you doing? What are you doing with your life? So I'm going to school full time. And they say, good job, congratulations, good for you. And that made it a lot easier to be a civilian.
So now I can be me. I can enjoy life, period. I can do school. I can be focused on that. I know the direction which I want to go. And if we remember that us helping ourselves will actually help everyone else, then we can actually pull each other up at the same time.
We've mentioned cultural competency, and right now this is a part of that. I have said earlier, if you can, please refer to our general cultural competency, but this is also very specific to higher education and veterans and higher education issues. In our own study at Swords of Plowshares, we were able to see the veteran perceptions of support and cultural competency. Veterans feel staff and faculty often lack veteran cultural competency. And in turn, staff and faculty provide mixed levels of support. We've seen quite a few where faculty might be coming from military backgrounds or military family backgrounds, and they've excelled. We've also seen individuals with no military background whatsoever provide fantastic levels of support. But the problem is that it's mixed. There's a very lack of consistency. There's also no formal training that is mandated to learn about the veteran population. Some campuses excel at providing support, while others have very noticeable gaps in their program and support services. The importance of cultural competency can kind of be boiled down to this, and not just that, but kind of how leadership should have addressed it. We had one veteran in particular who said, and I quote, "I was told I was a killer by one of my teachers. I had nothing that I could do because I was so nervous about this teacher. What kind of red tape would get thrown up if he had just dropped me out of the class?" When we understand veterans as a cultural background, we understand the supports and services attached to it. If you are going to school and you are using a GI Bill or using veteran-specific related benefits, if you are at a required amount of classes for that semester or that quarter, and let's say you drop out, that can negatively impact your benefits for the rest of that semester and really make the benefits following that semester or quarter potentially awkward or weird, or trying to get back on board and having to go through a whole bunch of hoops in order to be able to address it. So here we have a student veteran who's clearly in a hostile environment. Upon further research, this veteran was in a class where this whole topic, even remotely coming up, was so far out of left field, and to be put into such a hostile environment, what could have this veteran have done in order to address it? And then not just that, but then what really should have there been done in order to address it? We have a teacher-student power dynamic here where the student themselves are really in a disempowered position, and how are they supposed to address that to leadership, to deans, being accused of being a killer? How many traditional students who don't have a military background go through something like this? Unfortunately, it's terrible, but it's also kind of anticipated. There are student veterans who are afraid of going to schools in certain areas or going into certain areas just because of their perception of that school's perception, whether it's true or not. When we kind of summarize the difficulty of cultural competency and a lack of it, we're talking about veterans and non-veterans having difficulty connecting because of different life experiences. Veterans oftentimes feel like outsiders because of myths and stereotypes, which make it hard to connect with staff, faculty, and students. And then community education on military culture is not mandated on college campuses. So what solutions do we have for this? Veteran service organizations do provide cultural competency training on military culture, and they do it for free. Something as simple as inviting a guest speaker to talk about their experience can help dispel myths about the military. Also, providing a forum for veterans on your campus in order to be able to share their stories and be able to provide them room to connect with the civilian community. Peer mentorship is another great way to help veterans succeed in college and beyond. I've said earlier, but veterans are used to having a culture and an organization where we have a point person that we can go and talk to. We can ask questions to learn about all kinds of things, whether it's formalities, how to talk to people, how to interact with certain things, how to approach certain issues. And we lose that in the civilian world. By instituting that within college, by instituting that when it comes to student veterans, by having another veteran who could potentially be that peer mentor, they can help avoid burnout and they can help develop that connection. Even though we are talking about a peer mentorship that's specific from veterans to veterans, it also might be great to have a civilian counterpart who's also non-traditional but at a higher grade level, or even potentially connecting them with faculty members who might be more willing to advise them on school experience. Mentors help veterans avoid crisis. Mentors help veterans avoid crisis situations by providing someone to talk to who's been in a similar situation. So if we're thinking about, as a veteran peer mentor, we're talking about somebody who's maybe in their last year, they're about to graduate, or they're mostly done with their junior year. They can also provide career and professional development to be made easier when you have somebody to help network with and develop those skills. Because when it comes to college, not all of us know the best way or how to navigate college or to fully utilize our college experience. And then there's others who've got it down, and those people could help benefit the rest of us. Here's what another University of San Francisco student veteran had to say about peer mentorship, in that people have a hard time finding a common ground with civilians among us. And when you meet another veteran, it's an instant connection, instant camaraderie, and it's a home away from home. A lot of these veterans just feel alone. Student veterans on campuses often rely on one another for support. These students face similar challenges and can build a network of support to help increase resilience and retention. The benefits of this are building a community of peers, creating study groups of courses, clubs for vets, keep veterans engaged and connected to their past. And in times of crisis or difficulty, peers can listen and intervene, provide guidance on career advancement and coursework, and they can decrease isolation. We've got a few recommendations on how to address housing issues. Admissions must ask their students about their housing plans and coordinate resources for new students. They need to consider the possibilities more of veteran-specific housing on campus, which we know can be incredibly difficult for areas like the Bay Area. We also know that fostering relationships with veteran-friendly housing and neighboring landlords can also really benefit student veterans by having those connections and being able to directly funnel them into it. It's also important to educate students and staff on housing resources that are veteran-specific, to include SSVF, which can help when it comes to immediately housing veterans who are either about to face homelessness or are facing homelessness. We also recommend to create partnerships with community-based organizations to help meet the housing needs of student veterans that can't be solved by campus programs. Another recommendation is creating a student relief program or fund for student veterans who are homeless or at risk for homelessness. This has been done at many schools, including one of the schools that we studied. And it's also important, if we think back to the GI Bill and how the GI Bill only covers for your times while you're in school, is that it would be fantastic if there were schools that were able to address or assist in housing between academic sessions. A lot of the times we hear organizations, private or public, employer, we often hear various organizations talk about how they're veteran friendly, whether we're talking about different companies talking about their term of employment, we're talking about institutions of higher education who say that they're veteran friendly. So we've seen quite a few schools refer to themselves as veteran friendly. And one of the things noted by our student veterans was they don't know what this means. They don't know what you mean by saying that you're veteran friendly. Does that mean you help them navigate veteran-specific resources? Do you provide unique resources to veterans? Are you culturally competent when it comes to veterans? There's no criteria for what veteran-friendly means, and it just kind of becomes a tagline, like, oh, we're veteran-friendly. Schools need to have a more explicit criteria for this designation to understand why veterans should attend. If I'm looking at your school and your school's telling me they're veteran friendly and that's all I'm seeing, I'm not seeing a criteria for that, that's not telling me anything. That's not providing me any information. That's not providing me any incentive to want to check out your school or anything. If, on the other hand, you provide me a set of criteria, we're veteran friendly because we do this, this, and this, that's going to change my mind. That's going to change my view on how I should interact with your school, if I should be applying to your school. A few more notes from our student veterans when we talked about the discrepancy of what schools say they are and what they actually offer. Our first veteran here said that you can open the school webpage right now and it'll say they're a military-friendly school. They broadcast it like that on the website and show organization and support services that aren't even available. So that's a huge problem for this veteran if they're trying to recruit other veterans to come there. Another veteran notes that the website's not user-friendly. It's not veteran-friendly. There are not even phone numbers or anything like that for them to contact. How can campuses be more veteran-friendly? Again, schools claiming to be veteran-friendly on their websites need to support the claim with specific resource information. They also need to be championed by advocates, education professionals, and veterans themselves. When we talk about types of veteran-specific support on campus, we're talking about veteran resource centers as a baseline, providing a central location for information and a study space where veterans can be with people like them. We're talking about certifying officials, skilled professionals who help certify coursework through the VBA and often act as a resource for information on veteran issues. We're also talking about veteran clubs, providing a community of veterans for peer mentorship and support. Priority enrollment, which allows veterans to get courses they need and expedites their path to a degree. Veteran-specific orientations gives veterans a sense of what to expect on campus and directs them to common resources. Outdoor activities as well, an opportunity to connect with other veterans and building camaraderie through outdoor group activities. Accommodation letters are also a huge one, allowing student veterans more time to take tests as well as quiet study spaces for other needs. Problem here is when we talk about how veterans might not even be willing to self-identify, that's kind of the same thing when we talk about veterans with disabilities. They're even less likely to try and put forward that they might have a particular disability. If you're coming in to support student veterans and let's say you're in a position to talk or interact with a student veteran who might be struggling for a variety of reasons, and let's say they're struggling to get homework in on time, anything like that, that's one of those things where you can bring up if they need an accommodation or if something's upsetting them or something's struggling with them, or maybe they might have something that's a service-connected issue or a related issue. They could see about getting an accommodation letter from the disability office. You can also suggest, hey, have you been to the VA about that? You might get a variety of responses back, but just thinking about connecting them to that resource and thinking about drawing that line for them is significant. When we talk about student services, we talk about the services existing and we talk about how they serve unique populations. But the first thing that the student service personnel need to do to be effective is to understand the culture veterans belong to. So how can they accomplish this goal? Talking about building rapport by showing genuine interest in the needs of student veterans creates a more authentic interaction. As staff have established trust, it will be easier to provide services and solve barriers for students to encounter. Taking time to educate yourself and other staff on veterans. Cultural competency means that campus communities are invested in the lives of their students and respect their culture and background. Veterans are a culture. Learning from each other enriches the educational experience and helps build stronger bonds. Evaluating services to make sure that they identify and meet the needs of your students. Veterans are like any other group with unique experiences and common challenges. What policies do you have related to veterans? Taking time to assess if your student service department is accomplishing the goal of serving students on their path to degree will increase positive outcomes. Disability services liaisons. Veterans, again, might be reluctant to ask for help, and they'll find encouragement when a fellow veteran with disability can provide guidance. Student Veterans of America has proposed designating a Disability Services Liaison, or DSL. DSLs are student veterans with a VA disability rating currently using disability services. It can be a paid VA work-study position. It helps to normalize help-seeking behavior by introducing peers to disability and services and academic accommodations. a great way to do community service on campus. It's a great way to also do community service on campus. DSLs are seen as an indispensable resources on campuses across the country. They're connected to one another through Slack. And there's a toolkit, foundational online training modules, and SVA national staff available to support implementation. We've provided a link below to help with that. What services should be available to veterans with disabilities? Extra time taking for tests, quiet area for exams, note takers for coursework, accommodation letters, disability services liaison, attendance and deadline modifications, housing and dining accommodations, accessible media, sign language interpreting, transcribing, disability parking and adaptive transportation, other services determined by school, and there's a lot more. What can colleges do? Suggestions for campus administration and support staff that we've got here is implementing better data collection methods. It really varies from school to school. A lot of schools that we've seen in California struggle to have data collection methods when it comes to their veteran population, and that's for a lot of different reasons. There's not too much commonality there, but we have seen schools outside of the state. University of Lowell, Massachusetts has a fantastic data collection program, and part of that is by offering to waive admission fees for veterans who identify. They're able to immediately take that person, tag them as a veteran, and keep that at their Veteran Resource Center. And then for any of those veterans who are coming through their VRC in order to address issues, they keep data every bit of the way on that. And that was perhaps one of the most thorough data collection methods I had seen any school perform when it came to student veterans. Including student veterans in order to create strategic plans, marketing, and recruitment efforts is also vital. Having members of that culture be a part of that every step of the way is vital. Advocating for and developing to advocate for and adopt the Yellow Ribbon program for private universities and colleges is a substantial way in order to get student veterans to be a part of your campus. And creating and improving campus supports to better serve military-connected students. Reflecting on referrals and resources, how is your institution providing information on benefits? What are some barriers for veterans to access resources? How are referrals facilitated? Thank you for your attendance.